My name is Josh Armfield, and what's your name?
Martin Smedjeback.
All right, and I feel like it's quite an honor to interview you, Martin. You have so much experience in peace work and work for justice. I have a lot of questions I'd like to ask you, but first I want you to, can you just tell a little bit about yourself and where you come from and yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to be interviewed by you. Also inspiration. I was born in the south of Sweden in 1973. My home was quite apolitical. We never discussed political or social issues almost at all. So I was not very aware of these questions when I grew up. It was first when I became a student that I became really interested, and but it mattered a lot when I got confirmed in the Lutheran church in Sweden. Became very interested in the church and became active there. Okay. But especially my student years was very formative, and then I also joined the Student Christian Federation and became president of that organization for 3 years in Sweden.
Okay, and if I understand correctly, you did also lumpen or basic training. Can you tell me more about that? But eventually went a different direction.
Yeah, at that time, as the fact is today, also we had a draft, and most people did the basic training in the military at that time. But you could easily refuse if you wanted to, or do non-military training instead. But I didn't think about that. As I said, I didn't have any or many political views or thoughts at that time, so I did what everyone else did.
Yeah.
So I ended up in something called Ubåtsskyddskompaniet, which meant that we were like monitoring the Swedish coast for submarines, especially if there came any Russian submarines. Right. So we were basically on active duty. Okay. So my team had a 24-hour watch where we sat in a bunker listening for submarines coming to Swedish waters.
Okay, interesting. And what made you eventually come to the point where you didn't think that you could continue that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have like a formative moment that changed things. It was more step by step. Yeah. I think it was when I learned more about movements around the world, how they changed the world, and I guess I learned about civil rights movement in the U.S. And came to study that quite a lot in the coming years. Martin Luther King and everyone else active in that movement in the 50s and 60s, but of course Gandhi and other famous movements, and saw that they could be active and made huge successes without military force, actually with nonviolence as a method. And I also saw the great destruction that war is. I later went to Palestine and Israel and saw how destructive their conflict has been and still is, and to quite many other countries.
So tell more about that. How, you got involved with the peace movement eventually, and how did that develop, and how were you involved? Or you're still involved, I guess, but how did that materialize?
My first really big issue was the great inequality between rich and poor in the world. When I discovered that the first time was in India, where I saw real poverty up and close. Okay. And that was really life-changing for me to realize how unfair the world is, how privileged I am growing up in Sweden and having all of this that I have, taking for granted. food on my table and a roof over my head, etc. When not everyone has that. So I guess I began question how the world is built up and how society works. Yeah. And wanting to change that. Yeah. Yeah.
Was it hard for you to make that transition? Like, how was it for you to leave the military? Was that difficult, or was it easy?
No, I had done my basic training. That was all over, and by that time I didn't have any of these thoughts at all. Actually, they came later. So no, what you do, at least then, after you have done your basic training, you get en krigsplacering, as it's called, a place where you're meant to go if war comes. Yeah. Okay. So I had that in my drawer. Okay. So sometimes I took it out and looked. This is where I'm going. When I became more determined that this is not what I want to do, I don't want to kill another person, even if they come to our shores. Then I quite simply called them up and said, I don't want to be a part of this, and they let me go quite unceremoniously. Yeah.
Well, that's nice. And then you started eventually working with Kristna Freds and got involved with the plowshares movement, and have been, from what I understand, very involved in actions where you do civil disobedience, and that really inspires me and also challenges me. Can you tell more about how you got involved with that, and why do you feel like civil disobedience is important?
So quite soon after I had finished my studies at university, studying psychology as my main subject, then I got a call from Kristna Freds, or Swedish Fellowship of Reconciliation, which is the English name of the organization, and they asked me, would you be interested in coming to our office and working as a nonviolence secretary, working to have workshops on nonviolence and write about nonviolence. And I didn't know so much about nonviolence at that time, actually. So, but I was really interested in it. I didn't hesitate a lot. I took on that. Okay. So I worked there for 7 years. A bit different capacities, also within the organization, doing more administrative work, but also a lot with Sudan and South Sudan, going back there year after year to do long trainings in nonviolence. Oh wow! Yeah, with them. But doing this, of course, I talked a lot and I facilitated a lot on nonviolence, and of course, I had to study a lot to learn about this, because this is not something that you learn in academic circles. Nonviolence is unfortunately very rare when it comes to universities or higher education. So this is something I had to pick up myself. But of course I did that. I mean, the stuff is out there. You can get the information. But the more I learned, the more I felt, it's good to have these workshops. We need a training. But what about myself? I haven't done so much. I haven't taken any risks really in my life. I want to do something more, because now I have all this knowledge. I have these tools. So then I have a greater responsibility, I felt. So actually, when I had these thoughts, I got a question from some friends in the peace movement. Do you want to be a part of a plowshare action, to go into weapons factories and hammer on weapons so they can't be exported? Sweden is a big exporter of weapons, which many people, even in Sweden, don't know about, but we export it. One of the biggest, still we are a small country, of course, but we are one of the bigger weapons exporters in the world.
Per capita. And I think it's really relevant. The plowshares movement actually was started by Christians in the United States. That, or maybe you can tell a bit about that. There's actually a Bible verse in Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 2, where it says, the people of God will turn their plows, or turn their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and they will study war no more. And that's kind of how. Can you tell a little bit about how the plowshares movement got started? Do you know?
Yeah, it was a long time since I read that history, but you're right, of course. I mean, I think the ideas goes back really a long time in the Christian church, and well, of course, Jesus said you should love your enemies. Yeah. Well, you don't kill anyone that you love, right? Yeah. So I mean, we have the core message already there. Yeah. So I guess some, especially in the Catholic Church, many took that to heart and said, we need to do more. And I think especially with the Vietnam War, it didn't start with plowshares actually, but when they burned the draft notices, is it called that? Yeah. So that was one of the bigger civil disobedience actions, I think, that started a movement where they risked quite a lot trying to do what we can as individuals and small groups to make a resistance towards this huge war machine that we have in many countries, in the US, but also in Sweden. Yeah.
And I think that it's a prophetic action in many ways, I guess, which I think is very necessary to make change. But I also know that plowshares actions can be very controversial. And how has that been for you, and how has that affected your life to be a peace activist, but also, I mean, be doing very controversial actions? Or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, of course, that was a worry. Maybe not so much about myself and how it will affect me, but will our message go through? I mean, to be accepted by the public, or will they just think we're nuts and should be locked up forever? Yeah. So of course that worry, because I know that, like I said, small groups can only make a dent in the war machine physically. My hope is that people will react to an action and think, oh, maybe I can do something, maybe I can be a part of this, or in the long run, politicians will think, okay, people are really against this, we should change the laws, we should change the political decisions. So that's my hope. There will be a trigger event to something bigger, and hopefully more groups will maybe take on these more radical actions, or build more mainstream, bigger organizations that really will affect things. Yeah, I think that's the most pragmatic hope that one can have, really. Yeah. But actually, I mean, I was surprised how many still were positive to this kind of action. Yeah. We got a lot of, I would say, good attention and messages across this. I mean, some people, after action, people wrote me in prison and said, I heard about your action, I'm not going to do the same as you did, but I'm going to be active in the peace movement, and I was passive before. I mean, so that was a lot of encouragement. Yeah. Now, this last years, I've been more active in the animal rights movement. Yeah. That's a lot more controversial, I would say.
Okay, interesting. I personally have not been actively involved in the animal rights movement in the way that you have. I'm vegetarian. You're vegan, and so maybe you could you share? I'm sure you would be interested in sharing about why do you think that is? Why do you feel that's so important? The animal rights movement.
Well. So it's like a progression for me. I saw the economic injustices. I saw the war, how much it hurts people. But then it was peace activists who were vegan that I met, and who told me then, of course, I asked them, why are you vegan? Why is that important? Are people suffering? Hello, come on.
Yeah.
But then they showed me that, animals suffer. They are very similar to us in the way the bodies react and so on. We can see that if we kick a dog, we can see instantly. We recognize the pain in their eyes, and that's the same with pigs or cows and even chickens and fish. And when I started to learn more about the situation, it's staggering how many they are that suffer. It's billions. And if you just calculate some suffering, it's so enormous. It can't be compared to anything really, because there are so many individuals, beings. And we humans are totally responsible, because we put them in these factories where they live terrible lives, and then are killed almost babies. They are only children when we kill them. And why? Because we want a particular taste. So I found that so unnecessary that I wanted to do something against that. War is much more complicated. It has to do with political big issues, and of course individual leaders that mess up and have their power struggles. But when what we eat, that is so much more available to affect, I feel.
And how long have you been active in the animal rights industry, and what kind of goals do you have with that activism?
I've been a full-time animal rights activist for 7.5 years. Okay. But I began before that with doing some lecturing and so on, when I was both active in the peace movement and animal rights movement. Yeah. And as you said, it's not that I feel that the peace movement or peace issue is not important anymore. On the opposite, I think it's extremely vital, especially these times, that we are more engaged in that, as well as economic inequalities in the world. Yeah. But it's more like my Peter Singer, a philosopher, he talks about the moral circle. For me, it has expanded. I think it's so like that for many people. It starts with one issue, and then it builds, and then it just builds on that more and more.
Okay, interesting. One thing that I think of now that I'm curious to hear with your activism, how do you balance your life and do your activism in a sustainable way, so that you're taking care of yourself as well and can do it? Because now you've been doing activism for many years, and what kind of practices do you have to maintain your own health, mental health and wellness? I'm curious to hear about that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I think really need more people who are long-term activists and do it a lot. A big part of their lives, and I see so many burned out activists, unfortunately. And I think most of the reason is that you do too much that you can take. We need to have time to relax, to refresh. And I think I do take that time. I don't pressure myself too much. When people ask me about full-time activism, I say, it's full-time. It's not 24/7. It's full-time. See it as a work where you maybe work 7 or 8 hours or something like that. At least not more. Because you do need to take care of yourself. You need to sleep well. You need to exercise. And I do that exercise. I had a time where I did meditation. I don't do that anymore, but that's not my thing. I don't think I need it, but I do take time to just watch silly movies or action flicks or something like that.
Okay.
Because you do need that as well.
Yeah, I would also be really interested to hear, with your activism and doing civil disobedience, that has obviously affected your life in ways, and in what ways does and how do you live now? What kind of commitments have you made to be a part of the peace movement in this way, or the animal rights movement, doing civil disobedience? Can you just tell about what kind of consequences that has had, and how you live with that?
My father got first very angry with me, and I think worry was a big part of that when I said I'm going to do this plowshare action, because he realized that I might get a sentence, but also my career choices in the future. And my last real employment was with the Swedish Fellowship of Reconciliation in 2008. So that was a while ago. But of course, that was one of the worries I had. How am I going to get some income? Everyone has to have something to live on, right? But that has worked amazingly well. I did start my own company, so I did lectures and workshops and got enough income from that for many years when I was still active in the peace movement. But then some friends of mine did a year of activism, actually a group of them together. And that inspired me, maybe I can try that. Take a year, ask for donations of them who wants to support this project, and see if it works. So I did what I call a year for the animals. I started that in 2015. And I started in December before that year was going to begin, and asked for funding, and I got it fully funded that year. Wow. But of course, I mean, you can't, or it's very difficult to raise like a normal salary. So I live on much less than what you would make in a normal job here in Sweden. But it's really not a problem. I live in a community, so we share an apartment, and we live rather simply, and I'm very happy with that.
What's it like being in prison?
In a Swedish prison, in low security prison, it's not bad at all if you don't serve a very long sentence. So my longest sentence has been 3 months in, and I got a sentence, my longest one, for 5 months. But then if you're good, they will let you out in after 2/3 of your sentence. So no, and maybe I've been lucky. No one has like tormented me or threatened me or anything like that. That was my biggest worry, really. And I could read, I could write most of my sentences. So,
A lot of Christian activists I know usually call their prison time retreat, and it seems like it can be that way for some.
But I actually had a letter conversation with an American peace activist when I was at one of my prison sentences. And of course, the situation is so different. It was much worse. He said, "I can just hold out my hand, and there is another bunk bed beside me, and I can hold out my other hand." And so really close quarters. I had my own room. Just that I think made it much more easy. I had much more like a ability to live my private life there.
I'm also curious to know, like, what changes took place, or how did your activism affect your relationships with people that you knew and lived with? Because I guess one of the things I think about sometimes is I mean, you do civil disobedience. How did that change your your relationships in your community?
Well, not that much actually. I mean, I already had community with like-minded people who were also into what I was into, civil disobedience and peace activism and animal rights. So that didn't change really. My family the relationships there could have been changed, I guess. But as I said, my father got worried or angry in the start. But that was very short time. And I've been happy to have great parents and also siblings that has not been only accepting but supporting me. And especially when they saw that I wasn't destroying my life. Actually, I might be much happier in my choices than many others. I'm not boxed in a work that have too much pressure or where I don't like what I do. I wake up every morning and be able to do something that I feel is meaningful. I don't have a boss telling me what to do. I have that huge freedom to do, and I mean I couldn't be happier. And when they see that it's really no problem, then they are happy for me. So I'm fortunate also having those kind of family relations.
You're still involved in the peace movement, because tonight we're going to do something that has to do with peace. What is that?
We're going to do a training in nonviolence techniques, how you can intervene in everyday situations where there is some kind of oppression or injustice. So we're going to practice with role play different ways to intervene. I did this a lot before, as I said, being employed. But it's nice to now and then come back to that, and it's great to be able to train with you. You always learn so much also from other trainers, but of course also from participants that we will have here later today.
I'm really excited to be doing civilkurage training with you, Martin. Okay, well, I have one more question. What do you think the world needs most?
That's a good question.
Or okay, if I could rephrase it, what do you hope for most for the future? And if you could wish something for the future of the world, what would you wish would change?
I think now people are so caught up in this tendency of having things and wanting unnecessary things. I mean, at least in the rich part of the world, as I said, we are so privileged. We don't really need all this extra things. If people can just realize, and also what freedom we have to live another kind of life, then I think, and not like take on huge loans and being boxed in these, then I need this high-paying job, and I don't have any time or energy to be active in anything else or care about anything else. If we can just change these situations, I think people will open up much more for caring about others, caring about the future of the world, about climate change and these things. So I guess that's where my hope lies. I don't see it as impossible, because if people, I don't think people, it's something negative if we're too egoistic, but if they just see the possibilities also for themselves and their families and their close ones, that's not too much to ask. If it can be something good for both them and the world, then we really have a chance to get there, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. It's really interesting.
Thank you, Josh. It was a privilege to talk to you.
Yeah. Same here.
And I did interview with you also, so if you haven't checked that out, find out my interview with Josh about his story about how he went from being a military or being a soldier in the U.S. Army to a peace activist. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, Martin.